Hello, fictional. Welcome to the Fiction Series X. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei meets with the Kendo girls? Part 3. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Issei stood at his doorway completely dumbstruck as to who he was seeing. Katase and Murayama standing in front of his door in the middle of the night, with Sona and Momo just behind them. Katase and Murayama had a concerned look on their faces. Sona's face held its usual stoic appearance, but her eyes held a curiosity yet to be seen by Issei. Momo on the other hand, did little to hide what she was feeling at the moment. She was fidgeting with her hands, biting her lower lip, as her eyes kept glancing to Issei before quickly moving away. Issei could guess what the two girls of the student council were doing here, Sona because of whatever Elsha had done, and Momo because of the end of the meeting. But just why were Murayama and Katase here, this late at night? As confused as Issei was at his unexpected guests, he was also kind of glad that Sona as well as Momo had paid him a visit, as he wanted to talk to the both of them. But it was concerning to see Katase and Murayama here this late. Hey. So what are all of you doing here this late? Issei stuttered out. Murayama and Katase stepped forward, without saying anything, dragging Issei inside with an arm locked each of his by the shoulder. Their worried looks fading into anger as they stomped into Issei's living room and tossing him onto the couch. Issei could only sigh in response. The only time they'd done this before was when they were really pissed at him for something. The last time they dragged him away was when they caught him staring at a busty brunette in town, when they were supposed to be getting supplies for the dinner Issei's mom was going to cook for them. The berating he got that day was legendary. He'd never wished to go through that again, but it appeared something worthy of it once again. Issei looked up to the kendo duo, their angry faces glancing over Issei's body, as if looking for wounds of some kind. Issei tilted his head to side slightly as he watched them looking over his body closely. He then noticed the two other visitors follow inside, closing the door as they entered. Sona and Momo took their shoes off in the entryway, something the other two hadn't done, and stood on the other side of the coffee table. Issei thought this was as good a time as any to hear what it was that he did this time to anger his two mentors' friends. What did I do this time? He asked nervously. Katase was the one to answer, her hands placed on her hips. Her reddish-pink eyes beaming with worry and anger, her anger boiled over in her voice. What did you do? Are you that dense that you forgot what day it is we said to let us know if you needed to cancel? Katase screamed out, Murayama nodding in agreement with her pink-haired friend. Issei flinched at the volume of Katase's voice. But then he began to think of what she was talking about, his eyes widening as he realized what she meant. Tuesday, we're supposed to meet up after school for my training shit, Issei thought. He had forgotten about that, his mind was too full of the devil proposition. It was an agreement between the three that if any of them had something else they had to do, they'd call or text the others to let them know, and he hadn't done that. Murayama stepped forward to be in line with Katase as she spoke up this time. You've never not let us know when something came up before, so we got worried that you got yourself into trouble, like you almost did with the chairwoman. We called you, and when you didn't answer, we decided to come see if you were home. Then some weird lights came from your room, and a girl's voice came from your window. We've been knocking on the door forever, Ice. Now explain yourself. Murayama's voice held more concern than anger, her volume was closer to a normal level. Both Momo and Sona's eyes widened at the words of the brown-haired girl, but for different reasons. Momo because she realized that the lights they saw were from the evil piece and Ice's boosted gear, and when the female voice controlled his body. Sona due to the mention of the only female member of the school board. Venerana Gremory, just what did Issei do that could have gotten himself in trouble with her? Ice was stuck, thinking of how to answer the two girls in front of him. He'd really like to tell them the truth, as he always had, including the devils and his sacred gear, but with Sona and Momo just a few feet away, they might react poorly to that. So just how could he hide certain details for the time being, without it being a lie? He had an answer, it wouldn't really give too many details, but would hopefully give enough to satisfy them for now. I am sorry. After I met with the student council, I was lost in thought on my walk home. It slipped my mind to call you too, and I fell asleep once I got home, so I'm not really sure what you saw or heard. I only just woke up a bit ago and went to heat up my food. Shit. As Issei was giving his explanation, he realized that his dinner was probably a chunk of coal by now. It was only supposed to be in the oven for a minute, and that had long passed. So he ran from his spot on the couch and into the kitchen. When he stepped up to the oven, his worries were confirmed before he even had the chance to open it. The smell of burning food resonated from the appliance in front of him. Issei's head slumped in disappointment, even reheated, his mother's cooking was amazing. Issei turned the oven off, turning the cold water on in the sink to cool off the tray and food, so he could throw it away. Just great, now I need to make something myself. I suck at cooking. Issei thought as he pulled a tray with a black lump of what was supposed to be a delicious meal out of the oven. Placing it in the sink to cool off, Issei heard the quartet of his female classmates enter the kitchen behind him. He heard the fridge open, probably Murayama grabbing a bottle of water. Both her and katase had been told to think of his house as their own by Issei's parents after the first time they came over. Issei was surprised when he felt two hands, one on each shoulder, pulling him away from the oven as he turned it off. Issei turned around to Murayama, who had apparently donned his mother's apron for some reason. Issei's eyebrow rose, not understanding her intention, but she was quick to elaborate. "Since we're partially responsible for ruining your dinner, I'll make something for us. Yui and I haven't eaten either since we were standing in front of your house and all." Murayama stood there expectantly, thinking Issei would just listen to her, but he just stood there with a confused look. After a few more seconds of their gazes being locked onto each other, Murayama settled for a tactic she knew would work. "Ice, get out of here before I tell the other two what you said to the chairwoman." Issei wasted no time in practically sprinting out of the kitchen, nearly knocking over the chair that was closest to him on his way. Murayama giggled at the frantic fleeing Ice, her, and katase had learned quickly how to get Ice to do just about anything they wanted. Issei made his way into the living room where the other three girls were. Sona and Momo were on the sofa, katase was sitting on the chair to the side. They were talking rather quietly, so Ice didn't make out what was said. Once they noticed his presence in the room, their conversation went silent. Katase looked at Issei questioningly, her eyes looking around him, searching for her friend. "Ice, where's Kaori?" she asked. Issei pointed with his thumb towards the kitchen he had just fled from. "She's in there, she wanted to make food for us, since you two haven't eaten yet. I was going to argue that I should since this is my house, but she convinced me to leave her to it." Issei tried his best to keep a positive expression on his face, but katase saw right through it. She knew Ice wouldn't just let someone else do that without some form of blackmail. She started to giggle under her breath at how Ice tried to play it off. And by convince. You mean threatened to tell these two about the chairwoman?" Issei crossed his arms as he had a slight pout. These two seemed to share the same brain, how else would they come to the same idea? His response was quiet enough so that katase could hardly hear it, but Sona and Momo, who had yet to say anything to Issei, heard it loud and clear. "Yay, you two promised to never bring it up again, dirty liars." Issei uncrossed his arms once he noticed the other two girls sitting on his couch, looking at him. "Sona Kaichu, Ms. Hanakai, do you two want to eat with us? I can go help to prepare some extra helpings, the more the merrier, right?" Sona adjusted her glasses. Momo looked over to Sona, waiting for her reply. Issei couldn't see it, but Momo had a frown on her face from how he referred to her once again. Sona shook her head to Issei. They merely needed to talk to him, specifically to confirm who the female voice was from earlier. They had no intention of staying any longer than necessary, especially with it being a school night. "No thank you, we just needed to talk to you about earlier. Is there somewhere we can talk in private?" Katase was glancing between Ice and the student council members, not really understanding the situation. What could be so important that the two of them needed to come see him this late and talk in private? Sounds suspicious. Issei had his right hand on his chin, thinking of the best spot to talk privately. He wasn't really concerned about being alone with them. Elsha had said that Sona's family had a reputation of being good people, so what was there to worry about, and he didn't think Momo would ever do anything harmful to him unless he deserved it, but this wasn't one of those situations. The light bulb turned on in Issei's head. "We can talk in the guest room upstairs. Will that work?" Sona nodded her head. She and Momo both stood up from their place on the furniture. Walking towards Issei. Sona addressed Issei once again. "That'll work just fine, lead the way, it won't take too long." Issei nodded toward Sona. He started leading them towards the staircase upstairs. Once he reached the base of the stairs, Issei turned his head towards where katase was sitting. "If I'm not back down by the time dinner is ready, you two go ahead and start without me, shouldn't be too long though," Issei said to her. He thought it a bit rude to hold them up because he was preoccupied. Katase shook her head. Whenever she ate with people, she refused to start unless everyone was present, and Murayama held the same habit. Probably a result of being so close for the majority of their lives. "Nope, you know how Kaori and I feel about eating when someone's missing, just don't take too long." "Okay Ice. I'll go see if I can help her out." Issei just smiled and nodded before turning back and leading the way to the guest room upstairs. Issei was standing in the guest room across from his own bedroom while Momo sat at the edge of the bed and Sona stood next to her. Issei closed the door just to help keep their conversation private. Once that was done, he looked back to the girls. "So, Sona Kaichu, what did you want to talk about?" Sona took a cloth out of her pocket, then held her glasses in the other hand as she wiped them clean. Placing them back onto the bridge of her nose, her violet eyes taking a slightly more serious look to them, while the curiosity still was the most prevalent. "Before that, I feel it necessary to explain what led us to visit you tonight." Issei nodded. He had a small idea, but didn't actually know what Elsha had done to end them peeking into his room. Seeing his nod, Sona cleared her throat and began to tell Issei what made her visit his home this late. After our meeting, I felt a reaction from the evil piece I gave you earlier. Evil piece is just the name of what devils use to reincarnate other beings into devils. I gave this piece to you, just in case you came into danger before you made your decision, and step in to save you if need be. This new information was a bit of a shock to Issei. What if he had accidentally turned himself into a devil before actually making his final decision? He felt lucky that hadn't happened. He also felt a little flattered by Sona, someone who, no matter how many times he stared at those violet eyes, was captivated and drawn in by them. And at the fact that if she were willing to step in to save him, she valued his life, even if it was for her own gain. Normally in a situation like this, a summoning paper would be given to you. But with your sacred gear, you'll need multiple pieces to be reincarnated, so you were in no danger of accidental reincarnation. I also gave the piece to you for another reason. Sona's eyes lost some of the seriousness they held, which was replaced by a sincere look instead. As Issei stared into those violet eyes, they almost seemed to glow as the light from above passed over them. An evil piece is connected to the one who is the king, or commander, of the peerage. In other words, me. Sona placed her left hand over her chest as she said this, gesturing to herself. Her neutral expression diminishing from the small smile gracing her lips and her eyes mirroring it. Our talk earlier was fairly brief. I didn't get to tell you that the evil piece I gave you is tied to my magical signature. In simple terms, a part of me is inside that chess piece. Holding it close will give you a sense of what I want, what I desire, as well as a look into my personality. Deeper than what is shown at school. There is more to myself than what I can show at school because of my position in the student council. And the same goes for the rest of my peerage, Momo and Reya especially. Sona gestured to Momo, who was still sitting on the bed. At the mention of her name she smiled up to Issei. A gesture which he returned before moving his eyes back to Sona. When I felt the evil piece react, I used my magic to view where the reaction was coming from. It showed your bedroom, with you sleeping. At first anyway. The evil piece was on your chest glowing, as well as your left arm, which was glowing the same green as the red dragon emperor's eyes. Then your eyes opened, and they were that same green. And a female voice spoke from your lips. She said she didn't like us spying into your room, and if you felt comfortable, you would tell us just who that voice was. Issei widened his eyes a bit. Alsha hadn't said any of that to him. He didn't know what kind of reaction Sona and Momo would have from learning it was a past wielder of the boosted gear, and he didn't know what kind of reputation Alsha made for herself. Before Issei could continue thinking of what to tell Sona, she continued. After she negated my viewing magic, I contacted someone who I thought would be able to better inform me of what I had seen. And I was told that the only possibility would be a past wielder. So my question to you Ice is which of the two known female wielders was it? Alsha Levitain or Monica Kelpie? Sona had continued to surprise Issei. She used his nickname. She had only accepted calling him by his first name because he said he felt more comfortable that way. Issei thought this development was good. But her tone at the last name mentioned was somewhat cold. Had that person done something wrong? Sona Kaichu, you make it sound like one of these people is dangerous. Sona crossed her arms at his non-answer. But understood that he may want to know just why she was asking about these two women in particular. Both of them were dangerous in their time. Alsha Levitain was known as the Norse Fire Dragon. She was the strongest female wielder of the boosted gear. She generally used her power to help people. However, Monica Kelpie was the opposite. She became known as the Crimson Rain Empress. She slaughtered thousands just for fun. I merely ask because the guidance of either will help you to get stronger, but if it's the Crimson Rain Empress that I spoke to earlier, she will try to use you to continue her campaign of blood. Issei was still at a loss of what to tell Sona. If he said that it was Alsha, it could either soothe her worries. But then again, she could think that he's only saying that to get her to drop the subject. He started to fidget a little with his hands. Issei didn't have the means to prove who it was anyways. He wasn't strong enough. Aichu, I'm not sure you'd believe me no matter my answer. And seeing as I'm not strong enough to contact her on my own, I can't really blame you. She said she was only able to talk to me because of the power from the pawn you gave me. Sona smiled at Issei that had given her all of the information she needed. Alsha was talented in many forms of magic, whereas Monica only had talents for destruction and deception, so Monica wouldn't have been able to draw on the power of the evil piece. I see, so it was Alsha Levitain then. That's good to hear Ice. That's all I wanted. I believe Momo wanted to speak with you as well. I'll see myself out. Momo, don't stay too long, it is a school night. Sona said her piece, not waiting for Issei to respond. Then she made her way downstairs, grabbing her shoes and making her way back to her own home. Addis and Murayama were standing shoulder to shoulder in the kitchen getting dinner ready for the two of them along with Ice. Murayama had started making omelets, seeing as it was a light food and she didn't want to spoil their appetite for the morning. Katase had taken to toasting some bread to go along with the omelets, as Murayama didn't want any help with anything else. Katase turned to her friend as she waited for the toaster to finish. "Hey Ori, do you think he'll tell us about them?" Murayama paused in her motion, thinking about it for a moment. She thought about the time they had been around Issei. She felt that there wasn't much they didn't know about him at this point, and he knew a lot about them as well. But this wasn't just any sort of information. What Issei was dealing with right now was more life-altering than him coming into Kuo with his pervy side running rampant. Yes, they knew about devils. It was the devils that brought them to their current living situation, indirectly anyways. They weren't angry about it, they both understood that it was a good opportunity for their parents. "Maybe we should be the ones to bring it up, I doubt he will, and I wouldn't blame him." Katase nodded as they both returned to their respective cooking duties, the two of them thinking of how to bring up the subject. Katase and Murayama both turned around as they heard footsteps coming down the stairs. They saw Sona putting her shoes on before walking out the front door alone. Momo hadn't followed her. The white-haired one must still be up there. Suspicious, Katase whispered just loud enough for Murayama to hear. Murayama nodded, then saying, "We should make sure he doesn't do anything to her just to be safe. The food's done anyways." After Sona closed the door to the guest room, Issei still stood in his spot in the center of the room, Momo still on the edge of the bed. Issei started to rub the back of his head, his nervous habits still remaining with him. It wasn't that he didn't want to talk to her, more so that he just didn't know where to begin. Issei couldn't see the expression on Momo's face, her head was tilted down, and her hair covered his view. Momo slowly tilted her head up and stood up from her spot at the same time. Issei had only seen a neutral expression on her face tonight, which was odd, he'd never seen her like that before. But that wasn't what Issei saw on her face now. When Momo lifted her face, she appeared to be fighting back tears, but they were threatening to burst out. Issei was just about to ask what he had said or done to upset her, but couldn't, as Momo launched herself at him with an unnatural speed. Oof. Momo collided with Issei, sending them both to the ground, with Momo's hands wrapped tightly around his abdomen. She pulled her face into his chest as she squeezed him, a few of the tears slipping through. Issei looked down after landing on the ground with Momo attached to him and saw the tears streaking down her face. Issei placed one hand on her back and another on the back of her head, returning the hug she started. He felt her tense up for a brief second from the contact, but almost immediately she relaxed. Issei really wanted to know if it was something he had done that caused her to act like this and fix whatever it was. He didn't catch his slip of the tongue in calling to her until after the words left his mouth. "Momo. Did I say or do something to upset you? If I did, I'm sorry, I swear it wasn't on purpose." Issei chastised himself internally for that slip-up. He was pretty sure that she really was his friend, but hadn't confirmed it with her yet. After his words, Momo tensed up again. Issei seemed to only make the problem worse, and he could feel a wet spot on his chest from her escaping tears. So Issei did the only thing he could think of to try to soothe the girl lying on top of him. He tightened his grip around her, trying to hug away the problem. A minute had passed of Momo crying into Issei's chest before she regained some control of herself. She now just laid there, still having her arms tightly wrapped around him. She rubbed her face against his shirt to wipe away the tears, not wanting to let go and use her hands. She finally spoke quietly, but spoke nonetheless. "I'm sorry." Issei had just barely caught the words and wasn't sure what she was talking about. What did she have to feel sorry for? He couldn't think of any reason for her apology. "Sorry for what?" he said, his hand still embracing Momo. The white-haired bishop shifted slightly, loosening her grip enough to lift her face to make eye contact with Ice. When she did, it almost sent her into another set of tears, as Issei's face held nothing except concern for her and whatever was bothering her. But she needed to say this to clear the air between them and for Rias since she couldn't be here. "Reya and we hurt you. I should have said we were friends no matter what happens in the meeting. But I didn't. I was so excited at the possibility of you joining us that I didn't think everything through. We were selfish. And I'm sorry." Momo's voice was still trembling slightly, but she got through it without any tears thankfully. She hated crying. Momo watched Issei's face for any sort of reaction. She saw his eyes widen and his face turn from worry to a radiant smile. That set her at ease. Momo was genuinely concerned that he wouldn't forgive her. That had been the last experience she had of this sort, but for some reason, she felt a lot more emotions of it regarding Issei this time. Even if this is only because of the dragon's aura. "I don't care." Momo thought to herself. "So we're still friends," Issei said, his face smiling. That confirmation was a big deal for him, he hadn't lost half of his friends at school after all. Momo smiled for the first time that night and decided to answer not with words, but with an action that would put events into motion that she would be hard-pressed to stop. The Citri bishop removed her hands from around Issei, this time grabbing hold of each side of his face. Momo leaned her face closer to his, closing her eyes before her lips made contact with his. Issei's face started to turn bright red from the sudden occurrence. He hadn't been prepared for his first kiss with a girl. He thought that he'd have to be the one initiating it, but he'd been proven wrong tonight. The kiss that Momo planted on Issei wasn't complicated, no tongue or additional movement, just enough to get him to understand that she enjoyed being around him. As Momo released her lock on Issei's lips, the door was thrown open, with Katase and Murayama standing there wide-eyed. Neither Issei or Momo paid any attention to them, still lost in their own events. Momo smiled as she raised her head. Yes, we're still friends for now. The kendo duo recovered from their shock and yelled out to the boy they had anticipated to be up to no good. Ice. What are you doing? Issei stood at the end of the hallway after being dragged on the floor by Katase and Murayama, holding his left cheek. His cheek was red and throbbing from a hard slap from Murayama. After the two girls got him on his feet and started trying to interrogate him about what happened in the guest room, he was still lost in his own little world. After the thud the two girls heard while they were trying to eavesdrop, they both feared what Issei was getting himself into even more, which escalated into panic when they saw a devil locking lips with their friend. When Issei wasn't responding to anything they said to him, they shared a knowing look with each other, after a mutual nod. Murayama gave Issei the hardest slap she could muster in the small space. What was that for? Issei asked, rubbing the sore spot on his face. If he hadn't been lost in thought about what Momo's kiss and if that meant she was romantically interested in him or if it was just a friendly kiss, he would have seen the concerned looks of the two in front of him. But now that he was paying attention, he could see it. Katase was making an intense eye contact with Issei that he hadn't experienced before. It was different than when she would berate him for doing something stupid. It wasn't a look that he enjoyed seeing. Murayama was shaking her right hand, trying to get rid of the sting radiating through it. Once she shared the same look. It was more concerning seeing that look on the slightly more reserved of the two girls, and Issei knew something was wrong. What's wrong, you two okay? He asked them. Murayama was the quicker one to bring herself to voice her concerns. Katase was at a loss for words at the moment. Her experience with devils hadn't been bad per se, but it resulted in rekindling her small fear of abandonment. Not that she was dependent on Ice for anything, but the three of them had spent almost every day together since their first meeting and didn't like the idea of him not being around anymore. Murayama steeled herself, they needed to hear what happened and wouldn't show any leniency if he were hesitant to say it. She didn't have the abandonment issue that Katase had, but didn't want something to happen to Issei. He was important to her, she hadn't put a label on what that meant yet, but her feelings were secondary to their current situation. Ice, what happened in there? Why are you involved with their kind? What do they want with you? Murayama's voice was level and deliberately didn't say devil, just in case their suspicions were wrong. But how could they be? Why would devils have so much interaction with him unless they wanted something from him? If he didn't know they were devils, she would come off as jealous or just didn't like them, which was better than revealing that they were more than human. Issei stopped rubbing his cheek when he heard what Murayama said and her tone as she said it. The way she said their kind was surprising. She wasn't normally the stern one of the two. The thought of Katase and Murayama knowing about devils hadn't crossed his mind, thinking that Momo had just wronged them in some way before. He was a little unsure of what to tell them. He could tell them about Sona wanting Issei to join the student council. But that didn't explain why she needed to come here so late. He didn't want to lie, but he hadn't decided if he was going to tell them about him being asked to become a devil, so he didn't see much of a choice here. So he settled with something that seemed believable and not overly complicated. Sona Kaichu asked me if I wanted to join the student council when we talked after school. I guess I left my phone in her office and they found it after my mom sent me a few messages, so they brought it to me in case the messages were something important. Katase's face grew red from anger. She knew he was lying. They heard his phone go off while they were standing outside. She didn't want to dance around the real subject anymore, her emotions getting the better of her. She grabbed Issei's shirt collar and pulled his face closer to hers. She practically shouted at him before lowering her volume, since Momo was still fairly closeted. Don't lie to us, Ice. We know what they are, they're devils. Now what do they want with you? Issei went wide-eyed at Katase. They knew about devils. How? He thought as he stared back into Katase's eyes. When the grip on his shirt was released, Issei took a step back and looked between his two friends. Their unyielding stares not wavering in the slightest. Issei then realized his lie had been seen through and that was the one thing he always said he'd never do to them. His head hung down for a second, feeling guilty for doing just that. I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if I should tell you about them. I didn't know if you'd believe me or if it'd scare you. I wanted to tell you, I swear. Issei said as he lifted his head up to make eye contact with both of them. Katase still hadn't recovered from her anger completely, especially when Ice hadn't really answered anything that they had asked him. You didn't answer the questions. Why are you involved with them and what do they want with you? Issei wanted to just come out and say it, but remembering that Momo was still here, he thought it should wait until they could talk alone. And then once he told them everything, he'd ask for their advice on what they thought and if they'd still be around if he did turn into a devil. Can we talk about it in a little bit? Unbeknownst to the other three in the house, Momo had been able to hear everything that was being said. And once she heard that Katase and Murayama knew about the existence of devils, she paid extra close attention, also contemplating coming out to talk to the three that they meant no harm to Issei or anyone at Kuo. How do they know about us? This could be bad, they might sway Issei against joining Kaichu, I need to clear the air here. Humming to her decision, Momo opened the guest room door, making her way into the hall. As she turned the corner of the hall where they stood, Momo was followed by the gaze of the kendo girls that had taken Ice from her, but Ice himself hadn't noticed her approach. Ice, I should really get going now. She said. The sound of her voice behind him made Issei jump. Momo. Gah, don't scare me like that. Phew, it is pretty late, so, I'll talk to you tomorrow. Issei said hopefully. The memory of the kiss coming back in full force, but Issei was able to keep his face from flushing thankfully. He smiled over to his white-haired friend as he turned to face her. Once his back was turned, Katase and Murayama sent Momo suspicious glares, they weren't just what the girl was pulling by kissing Issei. Momo smiled back and nodded her head. Happy to see that their friendship was back on track. Her eyes then went to Katase and Murayama who were still staring at her. Yup, before I go I'd like to say something. I could hear you talking from the guest room, devils have really sensitive ears. I just wanted to say that Ice is my friend, devil or human doesn't matter to me and we'd never intentionally bring any harm to him. Momo didn't wait for a response, instead taking to bringing a magic circle underneath her to teleport herself back home. As the azure blue rune-filled circle appeared underneath her, Issei, Katase and Murayama all looked on in amazement at the display. And after another moment, the circle shined brightly, and as the light died down Momo was gone from the house. Issei, Katase and Murayama had just finished the meal that had been prepared by the girls. It was a quiet and quick meal, all three of them were hungry from not having anything since lunch, and the time was quickly approaching midnight. Issei stood from his chair and gathered all of the dishes, quickly washing them as the girls went into the living room to wait for their talk with Ice about what was happening with him. Ice wiped his hands of the soapy water from cleaning off the dishes that were used. Then made his way towards the living room, taking in a deep breath to prepare for whatever questions they might ask him, as well as the possible criticism. He walked into the living room, sitting on the chair off to the side of the couch, where Katase and Murayama were sitting. Okay. What do you want to know first? Issei asked, not sure where to start. He figured they would bring up whatever it is they wanted to know. He shifted forward in his chair, finding the most comfortable position, since they could still be awake for a while. Katase looked over from Issei to Murayama, having a silent conversation between themselves about the order of their questions. They had spent so much time together over the years that they could pretty much speak to the other without actually needing to say anything. She looked back to Issei before laying out her first question. How long have you known they were devils? Issei looked up to the clock, seeing the time, and did the math of exactly how long it had been since he found out. About 7 hours, at the meeting after school today. Issei shifted his eyes back between Murayama and Katase. Their expressions were varied, Katase was still slightly angry at Ice for lying. Murayama was neutral at the moment, she was upset that Ice lied, worried about his involvement with devils, and relieved that Momo said they wouldn't harm him. Murayama spoke up with the next, and most important question. What do they want with you? Issei sighed, he knew this question would resurface, but the full answer was rather long. He wanted to make up for lying to them, so giving them the full rundown on what Sona told him seemed the best option. When I went to the student council, it started with just regular questions, mostly about what I wanted to do and what club I might join. Sona Kaichu asked me if I believed in anything supernatural, I said I was more curious about it than a believer. She told me a story about the history between the devils, angels, fallen angels, and 2 dragons. Dragons exist too? Murayama asked, she figured that if devils existed, so did angels and fallen angels. There were probably more things too, but she hadn't considered dragons to be a real thing. Issei nodded. Yay, when she asked me if I would believe her if that story were all true, I told her I'd need proof, that's when she told me that her and the student council were all devils. Katase jumped in at this point, thinking Issei was just stalling to avoid answering the question. That doesn't tell us what they were coming to you for. Her voice was impatient. Issei flinched a bit at Katase's tone, she was right though, so far his story hadn't answered them. Has turned apologetic. I know I feel bad for lying to you earlier, I just don't want you two getting into something that might get you hurt. You already know about the devils, and you know just about everything there is to know about me, so I want to tell you everything. I don't like hiding things from you. Murayama and Katase both felt better at that, so they nodded and waited for Issei to continue, trusting that he really would tell them everything. I didn't know why she would tell me that they were devils, so I asked what it was they wanted. She said there's something inside me that might make people look for me, and if they can't find me, they could go after my family and friends. I thought maybe she just wanted to take whatever this thing was, and that'd be the end of it. But she said that she wanted me to join her to become a devil. And that she wanted my help saving a friend from something, and to help change the underworld by teaching young devils in a school she wants to open. She said she would help me get stronger so I could protect you too, my parents, anyone I care about. The two girls got a little nervous when Issei said that they, along with anyone Ice knows, could be in danger just for the fact that they were associated with him. And even more so when he mentioned Sona asking him to become a devil. Katase was the more affected, if only by a little bit. She lost eye contact with Issei, her head hanging down when she spoke up. When she asked if you'd become a devil, what did you say? I didn't give her an answer, she gave me this chess piece, and then I left. Issei said as he reached into his pocket, pulling out the pawn piece Sona handed to him. When Issei touched it, the blue color pulsed again, this time barely emitting any light that was nowhere near the intensity it had earlier. Issei felt the same sensation of moving water when he held the pawn in his hand. The girls breathed a relieved sigh that he hadn't become a devil yet. Issei brought them back out of their heads when he said that wasn't everything he had to say. After I got home, I was holding this pawn and fell asleep, or I guess was forced unconscious. Katase and Murayama both had confused expressions when he said that, now they didn't blame him for not calling them after school. They noticed that the chess piece Ice was holding had the same blue light they saw from his bedroom window earlier, and it was the same color that appeared around Momo as she disappeared. The thing Sona said I had inside me, it was one of the dragons from the story she told me, and a soul of one of the previous wielders, forced me asleep to talk to me, she could only do it because of the power from the chess piece, I'm not strong enough to talk to them yet. Katase and Murayama both thought, noticing a pattern, that Issei seemed to have a lot of girls starting to come around him. They didn't speak up though, rather just listening as he continued what happened to him, no matter how strange all of it may sound. Her name was Elsha, she said that the dragon is still asleep and will be unless I get stronger. So I can't even use whatever abilities this dragon gives me. Elsha told me that she knows the family that Sona is from and that they're trustworthy, they don't lie to people to get them to join them. After that, I woke up and you guys were knocking on the door. The two girls just sat there, taking in all the information that Issei had given them. He was asked to become a devil, they could be hurt just for knowing him, and he apparently had a dragon's soul inside of his. They both noticed how Issei hadn't said whether he wanted to accept the offer or not. Do you want to become a devil? Katase asked looking at the boy sitting to the side of her and her friend. Issei shook his head. Issei was looking exhausted from today, in a matter of under 12 hours, his entire view of the world had been changed. Honestly, I don't know what to do. All I really want is to live with people I care about in peace, but even Elsha said that was pretty much a pipe dream, that eventually people will come for me. So I guess all I can really hope for is to keep those people safe, if I can do that, I don't care what I am. Issei was going through scenarios in his head, what could happen if he didn't accept becoming a devil, and possibly never waking his gear when he needed it. And then if he became a devil, he'd at least have a chance to protect the two in front of him. That brought another thought made its way to Issei, what would happen to their friendship if he did become a devil? The thought made him nervous, he didn't want to believe they'd throw that away, but it was a possibility. Katase Murayama. If I were a devil, would we still be friends? His question was quiet, the girls knew he only got like that when he was afraid of whatever the answer would be. Murayama answered for the both of them, not waiting for Katase to think about it. There was no way they'd just push Issei away because he became a devil to keep them and his family safe. Even though he was considering becoming something that was written to be nothing but evil, his intentions were anything but that. Of course we would, is that why you haven't answered yet? Both Katase and Murayama smiled when they saw Issei nod slightly with a small frown on his face. Underneath all the perversion, Issei was a pure and simple guy. All he really wanted was people to love, whether they be friends or something more, and to help those who needed it. That, and how my parents would take it if they ever found out. They're finally proud of me again, I really don't to disappoint them any more than I already have. Issei said, his tone coming back to normal, knowing now that he'd still have two good friends no matter what. We'll help you with whatever you need, Ice, as long as you don't change back into a pervert. Katase said, her soft tone turning into a teasing one at the end. She agreed with Murayama, what Ice was biologically didn't matter. Thanks guys. Issei said with a laugh, if he reverted back into the pervert he used to be, he knew there'd be hell to pay from these two. With knowing that they would be by his side, his decision was just about made. But there was still one more thing Issei wanted to know before he made it final. And was just who Sona's friend was that needed his help and what that help entailed. Sona made it sound like she had a plan, if he was going to change his entire being to help this person, he needed to know what that plan was. I think I might do it, become a devil I mean. I just have to ask Sona Kaichu one more question. Who is her friend that needs help and how she intends to do it? The girls looked curiously at Issei, seeing his expression change when he talked about helping this random person. The silence continued with the trio lost in thought. Then Murayama brought them back to reality with a question that couldn't further from anything they had been talking about. Hey Ice. Why don't you call Yui and I by our first names? You called the girl earlier by her first name. Issei and Katase both stared at Kaori, they were taken back by her question, it was just so random. But Katase agreed, why didn't he? He knew them longer and better than the thieving Snow White. Issei turned his head up, a hand under on his chin. I guess because I didn't think you wanted me to, and I didn't want to make you mad and get hit any more than necessary. Well you should. I think we've passed that point don't you? Issei woke up to his alarm clock, groggy from staying up later than he usually did, and then had too much on his mind to fall asleep quickly. He was laying on his bed face down, blanket barely covering the lower half of his body from all of his tossing and turning in the few hours of sleep he actually had. He slowly lifted his left arm, bringing it down full force onto the noisy clock that dared disturb the rest he really needed. Issei groaned as the light of the morning sun came through the clit in his window curtains, raising his head to wipe away the sleep that wanted to pull him back in. Ugh mornings. I hate them. What can't school start in the afternoon? He groaned in a raspy morning voice. Issei lifted himself up with his arms, trying his best to not fall back asleep, and pulled his knees in to sit on. Issei stretched his arms up, yawning, finally coming out of his daze. A feminine voice came from behind him near his desk. If you good morning sleepyhead, I take it you're not a morning person. At the sound of the voice in his room, Issei turned 180 degrees and jumped back towards the headboard of his bed, smacking the back of his head on it as he overshot his movement. Issei closed his eyes from the sting the sudden contact with the wood gave him. Issei rubbed the spot of his head where he hit, slowly opening his eyes to see who had trespassed in his room. He was absolutely sure that he locked his door when he fell asleep. He wouldn't forget to do that after the one time Murayama and Katase slept over and decided to pour ice-cold water on him to wake him up to go for a 4:30 a.m. run around town. As his eyes opened, his vision was fairly blurry, still recovering from both just waking up as well as the impact against his bed. He could see the outline of his window, his desk next to it, and a shadowy figure sitting in the chair at the desk, with one leg crossed over the other. The shadowy figure was clearly a girl, based on the curves he could make out. The hair was long, so it wasn't Katase. But the hair of this figure cascaded over the front of her shoulders, so it wasn't Murayama either so who was it? Issei's vision continued to clear, he could now make out the color of the hair of the girl in his room, it was same brown as his, and the hair that laid over each shoulder was tied into braids. Issei had only met one girl with those features, but why would she be in his room so early in the morning? Issei's suspicion was confirmed as his vision returned fully, and he could see the girl facing him. The light brown eyes, with that gentle smile, and overall calm demeanor. There was no doubt about it, Issei was seeing Reya in his bedroom, and as far as he knew, he was awake. So Issei asked the only thing he could at the moment, with his brain still not at 100%. Reya, is that you? Why are you here so early? The figure who Issei thought to be Reya stood up from the chair and made her way towards him, her hips swaying with each movement. Issei couldn't help but to get a little excited at the sight in front of him, an alluring female figure swaying her hips as she walks towards you in your own bedroom, it was the start of many fantasies he'd had in the past. For this to be happening first thing in the morning was like a dream come true. As the figure stood in front of him, he could take in the full form clearly, and it was most definitely Reya. Bending down to be eye level with Issei, the braids of her hair swaying from the movement, but still laying in the valley between her ample bust. As Issei was struggling to keep eye contact with her, his eyes wanting to just stare at the magnificent pair of breasts a mere 2 feet in front of him, she placed her right index finger on his forehead and pushed lightly. Her smile widening as her push almost made Issei fall back into his bed. Ifufu, yes, that's me. I wanted to talk to you, I thought you might enjoy me waking you up. Issei recovered from Rias' contact before falling into his bed, sitting back up. His eyes landing on the strained white button-down shirt of the girl's cool uniform, noticing how the button between her breasts was straining to keep them hidden from the world, secretly wishing that it was burst open to give him a peek inside. Issei's drowsy state left him in limbo between his old perverted self and his new and more controlled mindset, so he at least wasn't making grabbing gestures with his hands. Riya's gaze caught where Issei was looking, but didn't really mind, knowing how hard he was working to control himself, an occasional slip-up wasn't that worrisome. Instead of scolding Issei, she aimed to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. First and more importantly, was to have the same progress as Momo, not wanting to fall behind. And secondly was to make sure Issei was fully awake. Reya placed her right hand under Issei's chin, her thumb resting just under his bottom lip, and pulled his gaze up to hers. She leaned in closer, just as Issei had met where her eyes were, and closed them before her lips made contact with Issei's. Her kiss to Issei was quick, lasting barely 2 seconds, but it did the trick. Issei was wide awake now. Instead of removing herself completely from Issei, after her lips pulled away from Issei's, Reya tilted her forehead into his, leaving it there as she said what was on her mind. Issei's eyes were wide in shock. Two girls that he'd only known for less than a week had kissed him on their own, and for reasons he didn't understand. I want you to know that I'm sorry for how I handle things between us. Issei tried to focus his side onto Reya, but with her being so close, her head laying against his, he couldn't, so he settled for closing his eyes to take in everything she was saying. Reya's voice was only held more emotional than usual, which was new, seeing as he had only been around Reya when she was calm and smiling. I wish I had told you how much I want to know more about you, to spend more time with you. Even after only 2 days, I know you're an important person to me. The surprise kiss from Reya had brought what little function Issei's brain had gained to a grinding halt. He wasn't ready for anything of the sort and was just scrounging for something to say to the girl as he was taking in the scent of whatever shampoo Reya had used recently. The only thing on his mind was the pleasant smell of strawberry radiating from the brunette attached to him. He tried to speak to her, but she cut him off as she lifted herself back to a standing position and held her finger against his lips. I need to go, we can talk later, okay? Instead of words, Issei only nodded, his mouth held open, still recoiling from the shock of the unexpected events. Reya smiled again towards him, tracing her hand along Issei's jaw as a blue magic circle appeared underneath her and disappeared just as Momo had the night before. Issei made his way downstairs to have something to eat before heading off to school. As he made it to the base of the stairs, he caught the side of the entryway to his house, seeing 2 extra pairs of shoes. Oh yeah, they stayed over since it was so late. Issei thought, realizing that the shoes belonged to katase and murayama. This wasn't the first time they had spent the night at his house. A few weeks after they met, Issei learned that katase had been living with murayama for a while now. Murayama had said that their house was being fogged for termites, so she asked if they could stay over for a night. Little did Issei know, that was only a ploy to try and test his resolve in the training they had been giving him. The 2 girls had gotten into his room in the middle of the night, gotten into the skimpiest clothes they each owned, and crawled into his bed after setting a camera in the corner to see how he would react to waking with them in his bed when he woke up. They had been genuinely surprised when he hadn't even tried to grope them, seeing the quick results of being separated from his 2 perverted buddies from his other school. Thus they were determined to limit the time he spent with Matsuda and Motohama. The more controlled Issei was actually pleasant to be around. Issei stepped into the kitchen to find the 2 girls already sitting down at the table with his father. His mother just finishing cooking their breakfast, she turned to see her son enter and sent him a teasing smile. Ice, you should have told us Kaori and Yui were staying over, we would have just gotten a hotel room to give you 3 some privacy. His mother said, much to the dismay of the 3 teenagers, both katase and murayama choking on their drinks. Issei had turned bright red from the implication that he invited the girls over for an intimate night alone without nosy parents around. Patching onto the tone of his wife, Issei's father continued to embarrass the 3 teens as he lowered his newspaper to look his son in the eyes. So Ice, who can we expect to have our first grandchild? Mom, Dad, what the hell? Was the only thing Issei could say in response to his parents. He told them over and over again that they were only friends and nothing more. But they still insisted that there was more going, and his father couldn't have been more proud. As a young man he wished to build a harem of his own, apparently the apple didn't fall far from the tree. His mother spoke again, further driving in the sentiment that her husband had started. I wouldn't mind having both of them as my daughter-in-law. His parents were too weird to handle sometimes. Issei was on his way to school, walking in between katase and murayama, who had been glaring at him ever since his parents made comments about them having children together. They thought that Issei had given them the idea that there was something going on when there wasn't, they were only friends. That was all. Ice made sure that his eyes were set straight ahead of him so as not to set off either of the girls, he could feel their gazes burning a hole into his head. They had been walking like this for the past 15 minutes and were getting near the school gates. Before they made it into the campus, Issei wanted to explain that he hadn't said anything to warrant his parents' comments, they just had already thought of the 2 girls as family, given the amount of time they spent around Issei. Issei stopped in his tracks on the sidewalk about 300 feet from the entrance to Kuo Academy, the 2 girls stopping with him and their gaze never leaving his temple. Issei sighed as he glanced at each of them and spoke. I swear on my life that I have never given my parents the idea that we are anything but friends, they just really like you too. He said, holding his right hand over his heart in an attempt to give extra meaning to his words, but it didn't work. That was made clear by the words Kata said. You lied to us yesterday, so how can we believe anything you say? She said as she crossed her arms under her chest, still glaring at Issei in a combination of irritation and embarrassment. Issei turned towards the pink-haired girl, the volume of his voice reaching levels that were dangerous, almost being able to reach the students on the campus grounds. Seriously, I said I was sorry about that, how was I supposed to know you knew what they were? Issei caught on to how loud his voice was and rightfully corrected it. His hands together in a prayer-like manner, begging for them to forgive him for something he hadn't actually done. I didn't say anything like that, I swear. Please, don't be mad at me, I hate it when you two are like this. Even with his begging, the two girls kept their arms crossed and the glare on Issei. But then their glare faltered and both were sent into a fit of laughter. Katase was holding her hands around her stomach and Murayama tried to hide her laughter with a hand over her mouth. BFFT, ha 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 ha. Did you really think we were mad at you, Ice? We know your parents were just messing with you. Katase said, trying to keep herself from laughing long enough to speak. Her and Murayama often played off of the teasing his parents would give him whenever they came over, last time it was just about which one was his girlfriend. Now having kids with both of them. Issei was stuck, he had gotten used to the teasing, but he really thought they were still mad about the lie from last night. But he was relieved that didn't seem to be the case, so he resumed in walking to school. Issei was thinking about how and when to approach Sona about his last question, before possibly becoming a devil. Should he do it before or after school? Probably after, who knows how long that process takes, and would it hurt? As they walked through the gates, a tug was felt on Issei's shirt from the right side. Looking towards it, he saw Murayama looking at him like she wanted something. What's up, Murayama? Murayama's face turned into a pout. Ice, you agreed to use our first names, she said through puffed cheeks and narrowed eyes. Issei rubbed the back of his head, he forgot about that part of their conversation. He had a small smile on his face as he spoke. Sorry. Kaori, I forgot. So, did you need something? Murayama let go of Issei's shirt, glancing between him and Katase, she nodded. When you go talk to the vice president, can we come with you? Issei was surprised that they wanted to bring themselves around the devils of their school, he didn't think they would after how they interrogated him last night. Issei didn't know how they knew about devils, but that was something that could wait until later. Issei couldn't think of a reason for them not to come with if that was what they wanted. I don't mind, but are you sure that you want to? He asked, looking from Katase to Murayama. Katase stepped a little closer to her two friends, keeping her voice low enough so that no one else would be listening in. We're sure, Ice. We told you that we'll help you with anything. And this is a big deal, we want to be there for you. Katase grabbed onto Issei's hand and held onto it, her eyes held both a comforting and serious look. Issei smiled at her, grateful for their support. She was right though, this was a big deal, and having friends by your side to support you was always a good thing. Alright, we'll go talk to Sona Kaichu after school then. Let's head to class. The final bell of the day rang throughout Kuo Academy, signaling the time for Issei to go and talk with Sona, with Katase and Murayama by his side. He slowly gathered his books and put them in his bag, he didn't need to rush, since the two girls were coming to his classroom before heading off to the student council office. Issei hadn't seen Momo or Reya all day, they weren't in any of his classes today. He figured that whatever Reya had to leave for this morning involved Momo as well. But during lunch, Issei had seen the tall girl with long straight black hair, Tsubaki Shinra. Issei asked if he could speak to Sona after school, which she said that it wouldn't a problem. She was a little apprehensive about him bringing the two girls that were seated next to him, but Issei told her that they had known about her kind longer than he had, so she reluctantly agreed and left to inform her king. Issei hadn't really been paying attention in his classes today, thinking of the things he wanted to ask Sona before giving his final reply on if he'd become a devil under her. He had gone over all of the things that happened yesterday, which was a lot more than he was used to. One thing that Elsha said to him stood out to him, she referred to Sona as a Citri and not Shitori. That'd be his first question. Ice, you ready? Murayama's voice came from the doorway. Issei looked up as he placed the last book in his bag and saw the two girls ready and waiting. Issei held a nervous smile, it was time to possibly change his life forever. Honestly, I'm nervous, but let's go. Issei, along with Katase and Murayama, stood at the door to the student council. Issei held his hand out to knock on the door, he looked to his left where the girls stood beside him and took a deep breath as he saw them give a nod telling him that it was now or never. Knock knock knock. Issei lowered his hand, waiting for someone inside to allow him to enter, he didn't wait very long. The door was pulled open and one of the two members whose name he hadn't yet learned was the one standing there. It was the girl with blue hair and eyes who was only just a bit shorter than Tsubaki. Her ocean blue eyes met Issei's, then glanced over to Katase and Murayama, she must have been informed that there would be 3 arrivals because she didn't look surprised to see the two girls. The blue-eyed girl smiled as she pulled the door fully open, stepping in line with the door in one hand gesturing inside. Come in, Kaichu is at her desk. The 3 nodded and entered inside in single file, Issei leading the way. Katase and Murayama took in the look of the expensive and rather fancy-looking furniture pieces that the student council had. Issei was only facing straight ahead. Walking deeper into the room of the student council, Issei saw the rest of the members and one who he couldn't recall seeing before. She was a girl just about Issei's height, maybe a tad shorter, with raven black hair just like Tsubaki and Sona. Her hair was held into a ponytail with an orange ribbon and flowed down to her calf. Her eyes were the same violet as Sona's, but they didn't pull Issei in like Sona's did. While Sona's eyes were calming and analytical, this new girl's eyes were mischievous. She wore the standard girl's uniform, with black socks that ended just below her knees. Her figure was just as alluring as the red-haired girl Issei had met yesterday. Her arms and legs were toned and slender. The most eye-catching aspect to her for Issei was the size of her breasts. "They're huge," were his thoughts as he had a hard time looking away. But a quick pinch to his side from Murayama brought him back to reality. The new girl was finishing up a discussion with Sona, so when the door opened, her full attention was drawn to the three new bodies in the room. Her violet eyes landed on Katase and Murayama and seemed to be appraising their value, for what exactly Issei wasn't sure. When her eyes came to Issei, the look of appraisal left and a flicker of familiarity came with a matching smile. This girl looked to be the very definition of the perfect traditional Japanese woman with all of her features. The new girl faced directly towards Issei, then Sona spoke just quiet enough for the humans in the room to be unable to hear it. Akeno nodded with a smile before walking towards Issei to leave the student council office. As she walked past Issei, her eyes stayed on him and her smile turned from a kind one into a smile that sent both excitement and shivers throughout his body. Once she was past him and had closed the door behind her, Issei saw both Momo and Reya standing side by side. Reya had that calm and sweet smile she usually did. Momo was waving exuberantly, bouncing slightly as she did. "Tsubaki informed me that you wanted to speak to me. What is it that I can do for you, Issei?" Sona said, bringing his attention from the two bishops to her. Sona was now in front of her desk, leaning backwards onto it. Issei noticed that she seemed more relaxed now than she had when they last spoke in this room yesterday. Issei cleared his throat and repeated the questions he wanted to ask in his head. "Yes, Kaichu. I'm pretty sure I have my answer to joining you. I just wanted to ask a few questions before making it final." The girls of Sona's peerage had fallen in line to the side of the room, listening closely. When Issei said he had just about made his choice, Momo was trying not to bounce uncontrollably from excitement. Ria's face was still smiling, but was playing with her hands in front of her waist, trying to hold down the excess emotions running through her. The blue-haired girl had her gaze locked onto Issei, as if trying to piece together a puzzle. Tsubaki held her stoic gaze, switching between Issei, Sona, and the girls that had followed Issei. The girl with the reddish-brown hair was looking at the kendo girls nervously, like she was worried about what could be said in front of them. Sona stood up from her position against her desk, walking back to her chair and sitting down into it. Her hand gesturing to the chair on the opposite of the desk. "Of course, why don't you sit and I'll answer anything I'm able to." Issei nodded, stepping around the fancy wooden chair before taking his spot in it. There was only one chair next to him, so Issei looked back to Katase and Murayama to see where they wanted to position themselves. But they had apparently already decided to stand behind him, one on each side and a hand on each shoulder. Sona took her usual stance, elbows leaned onto the table with her fingers laced together and chin resting against them. Her crystal clear violet eyes pulling Issei in, not moving an inch from his light brown irises. Issei took a silent breath, trying not to show that being here was making him nervous. The squeeze on each of his shoulders told him that Katase and Murayama could already tell. That sentiment helped, his questions were clear in his mind. So he began what could possibly be the last conversation he'd ever have as a human. "Yesterday, Elsha mentioned you by the name Sitri instead of Shatori. Is Shatori an alias of some kind?" Sona removed her chin from her hands, laying them onto the table, fingers still laced. "Yes, Shatori is an alias I took when I came to the human world. My real name is Sona Sitri, I am the heiress of my family. The Sitri family is an old and noble family name of the underworld, which is a part of the 34 remaining bloodlines out of 72 that existed previous to the Great War." Issei took in this information, a bit saddened at hearing that potentially half or more of her kind had been wiped out in that war she told him about yesterday. Death was something Issei had never handled well. But what's done is done, that was an event from multiple generations ago, nothing he could do about it. So he nodded and asked his second and most important question. "You told me that you want me to help a friend of yours from being enslaved to someone. I'd like to know more about this situation, who this friend is, and the plan that I can help with." Katase and Murayama hardened their grip on Issei at his tone when he said enslaved. One particular talk made it abundantly clear how Issei felt about forcing someone to do something against their will. It was a mutual feeling between the three of them, forcing someone into something they didn't want was absolutely unforgivable. Sona rose an eyebrow at the change in Issei's voice, having never expected him to hold animosity towards anyone. But in the situation he was asking about, that could help her, to help Rias her longtime friend and future rating game rival. You've already met the person in question. A longtime friend of mine, Rias Gremory, a second-year student here at Kuo Academy. And also a devil of noble blood. At the last name of the girl Issei was supposed to help, both katase and murayama withheld the urge to fassip him. Of course, it was just as luck to be needed by the daughter of a woman that Issei had been hitting on a few months back. The fact that she had been fairly receptive to his advances was more worrisome now that he'd be in direct contact with that woman's daughter. Issei on the other hand was trying to remember where he had heard that name before. Being only the third day of school, Issei could count the second-year students he'd met on one hand. There was Sona, Tsubaki and then that Reed he bumped into Wait. Rias Gremory, that was the Reed's name with the huge knockers and purple lace panties. Issei thought as his eyes went wide. What kind of situation had the girl gotten into, he wondered. What I meant when I said that she was being forced to be someone's slave is that she is being forced into an arranged marriage, which is a very old custom of pure-blood devils. But this man she is engaged to, Razor Phoenix. He only sees her as a trophy, as his property. He openly speaks about the things he'll force her to do and that he'll do to the rest of her peerage once they get married. He's been known to sexually abuse the members of his own peerage until they willingly submit to him, effectively turning them into his slaves. Issei's hands clenched tightly around the chair, hearing the actions of the man that was trying to lay claim to Sona's friend. His hair shadowed his face, leaving Sona the only one to be able to see what his expression was. It was one full of disgust and rage. Issei mumbled quietly to himself, katase and murayama unable to hear what he said, but they didn't need to. They knew Issei well and had a very good idea of the things that were going through his mind. The female devils in the room, however, were all a bit shocked and happy at what they heard Issei mutter. Women are not toys. They're people and should be admired, respected, loved. Not beaten and broken to do anything you want. This monster deserves nothing but death, beaten into the ground until there's nothing left. Feeling the tension coming off of Issei, katase and murayama both leaned forward, their cheeks nearly touching his, and alternated whispering to try and calm Issei down. Ice, you need to calm down, Murayama spoke first. No one here is in danger, he'll get what's coming to him. Katase finished, they both lifted themselves up when they saw Issei release his grip on the chair and lift his head up. Issei, if you decide that you want to join me, I have a plan that will ensure no one will be able to harm Rias or her peerage. Ria's only option, other than Razor agreeing to end the engagement, is another custom devils have, it's called a rating game. Issei's eyes still held some anger from thinking about how Sona's friend would be treated if this marriage were allowed to happen. But it was minimal compared to just a moment ago, thanks to katase and murayama. Issei took a deep breath in through his nose and let it out through his mouth, letting the rage dissipate. Then returning his gaze to Sona, she continued explaining her plan, seeing Issei's attempt to calm himself. The rating game is where a devil with a peerage is set against another peerage in combat. The rules vary based on the type of game, but the goal is to incapacitate the king of the opposing peerage, along with any of the other king's servants. Should you be the winner, Ria's engagement will be dissolved. However, should you lose, the marriage will be set in stone, with no further options to escape it outside of either Rias or Razor dying. Issei was listening carefully of how to free Rias of this man, who seemed to be as evil as books had described devils. What he took away from her explanation was that all he really needed to do was to take out Razor and the marriage wouldn't happen and she'd be safe. So he would need to train himself with that in mind if he were to join Sona. At this point, it sounded like Rias needed Issei just as much as Issei wanted to protect his loved ones. The doubt Issei felt about becoming a devil had further withered away, his ambition to protect everyone he could taking over. Now there was only one more thing Issei needed to know, how the process worked and how it would affect him. Aichu, can you tell me what goes into the reincarnation process? Will I feel anything from it? The entirety of Sona's peerage had been standing there silent, just listening to what the two of them said. They had the misfortune of meeting Razor on one occasion, and the impression he left on them resulted in a similar response to the one Issei had given. Razor didn't deserve any of the girls that he commanded, he was devil trash. When katase and murayama leaned close to Issei's face, Momo tried her best to restrain the jealousy that was clawing its way out of her. Reya merely looked on in great interest, not minding the very obvious feelings the kendo girls shared with Momo and herself. But Reya seemed to be the only one to accept how she felt about Issei. Dragons attracted both power and lust, they were also known for guarding anything they valued with great ferocity. Sona lifted her hands, palms facing up to the ceiling, the newly familiar blue magic circle appearing just above her hands. A chessboard appeared in Sona's hands, with one set of pieces on the board, with some of the piece missing. Sona placed the board onto her desk and picked up the king piece. The pieces left on the board were 7 pawns, 1 rook and 1 knight. The remaining pieces were the same pure white as the one she had given Issei. The board that the pieces stood on was glowing in an azure blue, pulsing just as the pawn had in Issei's grasp last night. As I said last night, these chess pieces are used to reincarnate beings into devils. Once used they turn to the color of their respective king, in my case, blue. These pieces reside inside of each member and give the person they are used on certain enhancements. The feeling of when this piece enters you differs from each king, my members will tell you it feels like floating down a river. The pieces can be forced to bond with anyone, but each are best suited with specific type of person and each have their merits and faults. The bishops are best suited to an empathetic and supportive personality, which are Momo and Reya, they get enhanced magical prowess. My knight Tomo Meguri gets a boost to speed, this piece is best used with someone who's loyal beyond any other. My rook Tsubasa gets incredible strength and defense, is best used with those that have unbreakable morals. That leaves what are two most versatile pieces. My queen Tsubaki Shinra gets the perks of all the other pieces and is best for the one closest to the king in personality. The pawn has no immediate bonuses, but when they enter enemy territory, they can choose any piece to promote to, except the king. Pawns are best when paired with someone who can blend into almost any situation. As Sona listed off the pieces, she pointed to the girl with reddish-brown hair Tomo Meguri as her knight. The tall girl with blue hair and eyes, Tsubasa, as her rook. Tsubaki was her queen. And by process of elimination, Issei would be a pawn. Being called a pawn was a little bit of a blow to the ego until Sona explained how the pawn was useful. Along with the queen, they could be the most influential of the pieces. Floating down a river just like last night. Issei thought as he recalled how Sona said it would feel to have her reincarnate him. He had that very same feeling just before Elsha pulled him into the boosted gear. Issei stood from his chair, taking a glance at each of the people he knew and trusted in the room. Momo and Reya, katase and murayama, were all looking at him. He stood less than a foot in front of Sona's desk, he'd made his decision. Aichu, I want to join you. Sona smiled brighter than she had in a very long time. She had just gained the Red Dragon Emperor as a member of her peerage. Her plans changed the underworld for the better were now looking far better than before. End of the part 3. So how was this story? I hope you like it. And if you like it, share this story with your friends and like the video too. And don't forget to subscribe our channel for daily awesome fanfiction. Okay, it's time for me to go. Bye bye.